Want to know the fastest way to lose money on an Airbnb? It's buying one without actually running the numbers first. And look, you'd be surprised how many people do exactly that. They see this cute cabin or beach house, fall in love with the photos, and next thing you know, they're signing papers without ever knowing if it'll actually make a dime. Then they're wondering why the bookings aren't rolling in. So in this video, I'm going to fix that for you. We're going to walk through step by step exactly how I analyze a potential Airbnb purchase. No fluff, no guessing, just real numbers you need to know before you buy. We're going to pull up a real property that's listed on the MLS right now, and I'm going to show you how I'd run it through my own Airbnb analysis calculator. Now, you can build one yourself if you like, or if you want to skip that step, you can grab mine at therealestaterobinsons.com/calculator. Now, big caveat here, this is the method that we use. There's lots of other ways to do it, and that's fine, but this is the approach that's worked for us, so don't come at me in the comments if you don't like the approach. Now, before we dive into the example, let me give you the 30,000 foot view so it's easier to follow along. Here's what we're going to cover. 1, all of the market highlights. Understanding your market trends so your projections are realistic. Number 2, what I call the Moat Test, and that's just making sure your property has a lasting competitive edge. 3, acquisition costs. All the cash you need to close and get your property guests ready. Number 4, income projections. How to pull realistic revenue numbers. Number 5, expense projections. What it'll actually cost to run this place. Once we cover those, we'll jump into the live breakdown. And by the way, all of today's data is coming from AirDNA. They're one of the few tools I trust for short-term rental data, and they've also sponsored today's video. And because of that, they're hooking you up with a 10% discount on an annual subscription, and the link to that discount's in the description of this video. All right, let's get into it. First up, market highlights. So before we start crunching numbers, we've got to zoom out and make sure that the market itself makes sense. Because if the market's trending in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how good the property looks on paper, your projections will fall apart. Now, this isn't a full-blown lesson on market selection. That's like a whole separate video. Here, we're just looking for the high-level trends that tell us whether to keep our projections conservative or if we can maybe give them a little bit of boost. And specifically, here's what I'm looking at. First, the year-over-year trends. I want to know if revenue per available room, or RevPAR, is going up or down, both in terms of the dollars and in percentage. Same for occupancy. If either of those numbers has been dropping, I'm going to have to be more conservative in my income estimates. And if they're steadily climbing, well, I mean, that's a good sign. Number 2 is supply. How many active listings are in this market right now? And more importantly, how has that number changed year over year? If I'm seeing multiple years of double-digit, 20, 30% supply growth, that tells me competition is heating up, and I need to be more realistic about what that means for my property. Number 3 is demand. Is demand keeping up with supply? Are travelers still coming to the area in large numbers? If demand is flat, but supply is rising super fast, that's a red flag. These key factors are here to tell me how optimistic or cautious I should be when I run my numbers. If the trends look strong, I might lean towards my middle or best case revenue projections. If they look shaky, maybe I'm going with my worst case scenario. Now, once we've got a handle on the market, we can move on to the next filter, which is what I call the Moat Test. And this is making sure the property itself has something that sets it apart. All right, so once the market checks out, the next thing I want to know is, does this property have a moat? Now, I'm not talking about, a literal castle with a moat. I mean, though, honestly, if you have one of those, call me because I'm definitely interested. But when I say moat in terms of real estate, in terms of short-term rentals, it's something about the property that your competitors can't easily replicate or just simply buy after the fact. It's your built-in competitive advantage. It's the thing that makes your listing stand out. Even if 100 new listings hit the market tomorrow, they couldn't necessarily compete with yours. Now, here are a few examples of what a moat might look like. It could be proximity to major attractions. Think beaches, ski resorts, convention centers, stadiums, hiking trails. Being minutes away is a huge advantage. It could be views, mountain ranges, oceanfront, city skylines. You can't just add those kinds of things later. It could be unique zoning or grandfathered rights. In places where short-term rentals are heavily restricted, having a property that's legally allowed to operate is like having a golden ticket. I know someone who owns some properties in New York City that's zoned correctly, and after all those Airbnbs got banned, he's still been able to rent his, and he is going like gangbusters with that property. Next could just be the sheer size or privacy. A sprawling property on 50 acres gives guests a sense of exclusivity that competitors can't match without having 50 acres themselves. It could be one-of-a-kind builds or settings. Think like tree houses, cliffside homes, cave dwellings, converted silos, unique stays that get people clicking book now before they even check the price. So that's what a moat is. What a moat is not are simple amenities that anyone can add, like a game room. Everyone can add a game room if they have the space. It could be hot tubs or pools. Those are all things that with enough either capital or time, you can add those things to a property, so those wouldn't be considered moats. And then once you spot a moat, you've also got to think long-term. Will it still be an advantage 5, 10, 15 years from now? That's what I call the kind of longevity stress test. Ask yourself, could regulations or maybe climate change or infrastructure issues erase this edge over time? For example, I know people in markets where shoreline erosion is happening, ski resorts are closing, or zoning laws are changing. If a property passes the moat test, my confidence in the deal goes way, way up. Because now, even if the market shifts a little, you've got something no one else can copy. And that's priceless in short-term rentals. Once we've confirmed the moat, it's time to start getting into the actual numbers, starting with acquisition costs. All right, so now we'll get into the numbers. The first category we're focusing on is acquisition costs. This is everything it's going to take to get the property from for sale to guest ready. And in our Airbnb analysis calculator, we break it down like this. First up is purchase price. This is either the price you realistically think you can get the property for, or if you're negotiating, just plug in the number you'd expect to close at. Next is your down payment, and this is calculated just as a percentage of your purchase price. For example, if you're putting 20% down on a $500,000 property, the calculator automatically figures out your down payment in dollar terms. This number is going to vary depending on the type of loan product that you use, so ask your lender for the details on the loan that you're going to use. And if you need a lender, head over to the realestaterobinsons.com/lending to meet with my own lender. Next up are your closing costs. These are generally expressed as like a percentage of your purchase price, and they cover things like your title fees, lender fees, inspections, escrow. In our calculator, you can set your estimated percentage, and again, it'll output a dollar amount. And again, your lender or even your agent can give you a ballpark figure for what closing costs might be in your market, but somewhere between 2 to 3% is what we typically see. Next, we have renovation costs. If the property needs work, whether it's a fresh coat of paint or a full kitchen remodel, put that number there. This is the one area where being honest with yourself pays off tremendously. Underestimating here can totally sink your deal. And you can use a bit of, your best guess as you're doing your initial analysis, but you'll 100% want a real quote from a GC or handyman before you actually close. Next are your setup costs. This is your household essential items, right? Your linens, your kitchenware, and anything else you need to make the place guest ready. And in our experience, the setup budget honestly surprises a lot of people, but it's even things like your televisions. You need TVs for each place, your forks, your knives, your towels. There's a lot of little household essentials that go into this. And finally, you have your design and amenities costs. This includes the cost for actually hiring a professional designer, because yes, you need to hire one, as well as the big items you'll purchase. Things like your fixtures, your couch, your bed frames, your wall art, your murals, your game room furniture, your outdoor furniture, your string lights, and all of the other little details that your designer will hand over to you in their design packet. You should plan to budget at least $25 to $30 per square foot for design and amenities, and potentially more depending on the size of your property and the market you're in. The more competitive the market, the more amenities and design aspects you'll need. Now, again, if you need help with the design, you can head over to the realestaterobinsons.com/design to get a free design quote from our team. Once you have your figures for each of those costs, you add all of them up to get your total cash to close. This is the number you need in the bank to get the property purchased, furnished, and ready to start taking bookings. And again, for most new Airbnb investors, that number is higher than they originally anticipated. And why does this matter so much? Because a property might look like a great deal until you add up everything it takes to actually get it running. By running through these numbers up front, you make sure you're not blindsided later. Once you know your acquisition costs, the next step is figuring out how much money this place can actually make you. That's where we get into the income projection. All right, now that we know exactly what it's going to cost to buy and set up the property, let's talk about how much money it can realistically bring in. The goal here is to come up with 3 revenue scenarios: your worst case, your middle case, and your best case, so we can run the numbers with a full range of possibilities. In our calculator, these feed directly into your income analysis so you can see how each scenario affects your returns. But here's the process. Step 1, get a factual snapshot of the property as it is today. look at size, location, architecture, construction, quality, design, amenities. We want the raw facts before we think about upgrades or changes. Step number 2 is to define the future state. What are you going to do to improve the property? Are you going to add amenities, a hot tub, a gym? Are you renovating the kitchen? Or are you upgrading the design to match the top listings in your market? This helps you figure out which comps are going to be relevant. Which takes us to step number 3 is to pool comparable properties. Use AirDNA to find listings that match. You want the same bedroom count, maybe plus or minus 1 if you're in a small market. You want properties with at least a few reviews and those that are active most of the year. And then just simply filter out the properties that don't match your size, location, or style. Then, and I like to do this, ignore the revenue and just look at the listings without the revenue figures to make sure you don't have any bias. Step 4 is to categorize your comps. You've got your worst case, your middle case, and your best case. Worst case means if you listed the property exactly as it is today, could it compete with this listing? Middle case is if you plan to make improvements and aim to be just above average. And best case is if you go all out and you try and be in the top 10%, you're competing with those listings. And then I also like to add like a not applicable because sometimes a comp doesn't work. Maybe it's the same bedroom count, but it's like twice the square footage. Or maybe it's the same square footage, but it's sitting on a lot that's 10 or 20 times bigger. Or if you're in like a beach market, your property is 2 blocks away from the water. The other one is uglier, but it's right on the beach, right on the water. You get the idea. But you want to make notes next to each comp so you remember why it landed in that category. Step number 5 is to find the revenue ranges. Once your comps are categorized, filter by each case, your worst, middle, and best, and find realistic revenue ranges. Then choose your number within that range. And I typically like to ignore the outliers that are either way too high or way too low because typically you'll see a few of those. Now, one point on cleaning fees. AirDNA revenue numbers include cleaning fee income. That means guests are paying them, but you can actually make a small margin here if you charge slightly more than what your cleaner charges you. So you'll see cleaning fees both as like an income and an expense line. Now, our calculator takes your daily rate and your occupancy to estimate monthly revenue for each one of those scenarios, your worst, your middle, and your best, which then rolls into your cash flow and ROI calculations. Once your income is set, the last big piece of the puzzle are expenses, because it's not about what you make, it's about how much you actually keep. All right, so we've figured out what it's going to cost to buy the property and what it can actually bring in terms of revenue. Now let's talk about the not so sexy part, your expenses. Because if you ignore these, your profitable Airbnb can quickly turn into a money pit. In our calculator, we break expenses into several key categories. First is your mortgage. This includes your principal and interest based on the purchase price, down payment, and loan terms. Now again, your lenders can give you the exact numbers for those. Then you add in taxes and insurance. The calculator automatically combines these to give you your total principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, or your pity payment. Next is utilities. Unlike long-term rentals, you're covering all utilities: water, gas, electricity, trash, internet. These vary a lot by property size and location. The best way to estimate is by asking your agent, a property manager, or even just calling the local utilities companies directly. Next are your online travel agency fees. Platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo take a cut of every booking. For Airbnb, it's typically 3% from us as hosts. Now, the calculator factors this in as a monthly percentage based on your projected revenue. Then you have your cleaning costs. Again, every guest pays a cleaning fee, but you still have to record it here because it's an operating expense. You still have to go back and pay your cleaner. And again, if your cleaner charges less than what you charge to your guests, you just get some small margin there. All right, and next you have your repairs, maintenance, and CapEx. You want to set money aside every month for repairs, light bulbs, broken chairs, etc. And big future expenses, appliances, HVACs, your roof. Somewhere between like 10% of gross revenue is a good starting point. In addition to that, you've also got your reserves and improvements. This is money intentionally set aside for rainy days and to keep your property competitive with upgrades over time. With short-term rentals, you can't just set it and forget it. Your space needs to evolve. And last are your general operating expenses. This is everything else that keeps the place running: consumables, toilet paper, coffee pots, landscaping, pest control, software tools. If it costs money to operate the property, it goes here. Once all of these are plugged into the calculator, you'll see exactly how much of your gross income you get to keep as net operating income. And from there, you can calculate your cash flow for each scenario. All right, with acquisition, income, and expenses covered, it's time to put it all together and run the live analysis so you can see how it works in real time. Okay, so we've talked through everything we need to talk through at a high level, right? The information you need to analyze Airbnbs, But let's actually jump in front of the computer. I'm going to pull up my screen and you can follow along. And I'm going to show you two different ways to analyze a property. The first way will be through AirDNA directly. And the second way will be exporting data from AirDNA and using my custom Airbnb calculator. And the property we'll be analyzing is this one. All right, so here's the property that we're going to be analyzing, 893 Silvertip Drive in Big Bear Lake, California. Market not too far from where some of our properties are at. Now, like I mentioned before, we want to start with just a quick overview of the market. Where is it going? How is it trending? So again, on AirDNA, you can pull a lot of this data. So let me jump over to AirDNA. So here's what AirDNA looks like for this specific market. I can see how many listings there are. And if I click on the listings tab, I can see all of the different properties, their revenue, their occupancy, and I can see data for all the different properties that are here. I also have the ability to filter these. If I want to filter down to just like 4 bedrooms, which is my property, I can do that as well. But let's go back to the submarket performance because that's what we're looking at right now. And I can see annual revenue by month, occupancy by month at a snapshot. But here I can see some supply information around listings, right? I can see that there's 3,025 active listings right now. I can see what the listings look like on a monthly basis going all the way back to 2022. This is that supply information that I was talking about earlier. How is it trending? And what's interesting here is that we actually see an 8% drop in supply. So supply is going down, right? Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Hard to know right now. I think we want to look at the demand data to get a better sense, but in general, it's good to see that we're not oversupplied maybe in this market right now. And as I go through here, I can see other items about the listings that are here, but here I have occupancy data. And I can go back for the last, quite some time and see occupancy data. And again, we're up 4% on occupancy. So isn't that interesting? We're down 8% on listing supply, but we're up 4% on occupancy. That's a good sign. It means that maybe a lot of the folks that were just like kicking cans in this market, that were dipping their toes in the water have exited. And they've either sold, they've converted to long-term rentals, whatever it may be. But the fact that we're seeing supply decrease and occupancies increase, it's a good sign. We have revenue figures. We have demand numbers here, right? How has booking demand looked over the last however long? And again, we can see bookings are up 3%. So I'm seeing actually a lot of good things in this market in terms of where it's at currently, which way it's headed. We can see revenue numbers. Again, I can go back 3 years. So I took all of this data. I kind of scraped it from this page and I put together this little handy dandy sheet here. And I've got my average monthly listings, and this is just for the entire year. I've got listings percent change. So in the last 12 months, it's gone down 9% after having, some decent growth over the last couple of years, flat for the last few. But here is my demand figures. So I can see RevPAR on a year by year basis. We have some strong RevPAR coming out of COVID, like most markets. Saw a pretty steep drop from 21 going into 22, right? A 28% decrease. But we've pretty much stabilized. And here at this 168, it's the highest number that we've had since 2021, right? And it's climbing at a healthy pace right now. So these are good numbers. Occupancy declined a little bit here, but we still saw some gains in the last 12 months. 36%, again, close to our highest number since 2022 almost. So I'm seeing some good things here. I like the way that this market is headed, right? And remember, that was the first thing that we wanted to look at as we did our analysis, was that quick market snapshot. How are things looking? How are things going? All right. Now, the next thing that we want to look at, the next piece here, is our Moat Test. Right? Like, is there a moat for this property? Now, let's just look through the photos. Let's kind of see where it's at. We've got a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, just under 2,500 square feet, asking about $880 for this specific property. Now, just looking at the photos, right? These first few that pop up here, it's a decently sized cabin, right? It's not like a 4-bedroom that's 1,700 square feet or 1,800 square feet. We're at 2,500 square feet, which is a good size for this many bedrooms. We've got some good space down here, actually, it looks like, where maybe we can add some more things from an amenity standpoint. And the overall architecture is pretty strong. We've got these nice, big, tall, almost like A-frame-esque windows here in the living room. We've got a nice deck that kind of wraps around a little bit. So there's some good things here architecturally, structure-wise, from this property. Let's kind of continue through the photos here. And I always start here with just the photos, just to get a sense of the current condition of the property, right? So interiors, we get inside. This is a decent living room space, right? We've got, again, the nice tall windows. We've got updated flooring. Still some of the older elements you can tell, right? Like kind of the trim around the windows looks a little bit older. But they've made some updates, right? These are older cabinets. It looks like they've just maybe repainted, added some newer fixtures there. But overall, this is a decent condition for a cabin. Even the furnishings, assuming that the furnishings sell with the property, the furnishings are decent, right? Is it professionally designed? I don't get that vibe, but it's just good, solid furniture, right? Yeah, same here, right? We can tell that the bathrooms are a little dated. They've made some updates to the fixtures here. Super bare white walls, mostly throughout most of the bedrooms. Yeah, again, not terrible, not amazing, but solid, right? As we go through here, they've got a little bit of like a gaming area in the loft, it looks like. One of the decks here on the other side is what we're seeing. Again, very underutilized here on the outside decks. We've just got like some old school kind of like cabin type furniture. This little area is actually kind of cool. This little deck right off of here. We've got a small fire pit. There's a grill. That's cool. On the back side here, and this is actually really, really neat. I saw this as I was looking through this. We've got this like, built into the deck type hot tub. So it'd be cool, I think, to spruce this space up definitely a little bit more. So that becomes, more photogenic, I think would be the goal here. But let's look through the rest of these photos. I can tell that we're a little bit closer to our neighbors as well. Like you can see, I can see one of the other cabins here, so we're not sitting on a big piece of land. This photo is also a good sign as well, because we can see we're not incredibly close to the water. Like I can see the water from this big zoomed out view, but from the cabin itself, we're not at the water. We're not lakefront. So that's also, that's also something to consider. So as I go through this, I'm not really seeing any moats for this property, right? We don't have proximity. Again, if I scroll back down here to this view, we don't have proximity to the lake. We don't have views necessarily of like the mountains or the lake itself. We don't have just like, we're not sitting on this massive lot where you feel like you're in the middle of the woods, and it's not really a unique structure, right, in and of itself. So in terms of a moat, this property doesn't really have one. Okay. Now, does that make it a bad deal? Absolutely not. It just means that we've got to find some other ways to compete. And you'll actually see as we start to go through the next steps here that a lot of the other properties don't have moats either. And a lot of them actually aren't all that great. All right. But that's the moat test. Okay. So now let's jump over to the actual analyzing of this deal. Now, remember, I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. The first way will be using AirDNA, and the second way will be using my own calculator. Okay, so let me show you how to use AirDNA to analyze a deal. Now, I'm logged into AirDNA, and we're going to go to the Rentalizer tab. All right, so once we land on the Rentalizer page, we're going to be able to plug in the address. And before I start, let me just say AirDNA has done a phenomenal job of rebuilding their Rentalizer tool from the ground up, because previously it was good, but now it's a really, really solid tool to project your top line income, your operating expenses, and your net operating income. So I can take the address. We're going to take the address. You can see it right here. And once I pop in the address, it takes me to this page. Okay. And this is where the magic starts to happen. But I can see the listing here itself, right? We got the 4 beds, 3 baths. I have the projected revenue, the occupancy, the ADR, confidence score, the comp sets, the operating expenses, the NOI, the cap rate, revenue, right, by month. I can see amenities that are comparable in the market, how the revenue's changed. I can see a map of the comps. So there's a lot that's on this page. So let's kind of break it down one piece at a time. So first we have the just basic property details. Now it gives you the drop down here. If for whatever reason, maybe the data pulled in isn't correct, or if you're going to be doing some renovations and adding maybe some bedrooms or bathrooms, you can adjust that. For example, with the 4-bedroom, I'm probably going to be able to get up to maybe like 12 to 14 guests, right? Maybe put some bunks in one of the bedrooms and expand our sleeping capacity, have some sleeper bunks or sleeper sofas. So I'm going to update this to 14, and then I'll hit update. And now it'll update how it's kind of trying to find comps within the area, okay? So you can make any adjustments you need to here. The next area, this section here, is projecting your revenue, your occupancy, and your ADR. The way that it's doing this is AirDNA is pulling in the comps that it feels are most similar to yours within about a 10-mile radius of your subject property. And this confidence score, which is a really unique thing that they added that I think makes this process even more intuitive, the confidence score is based on how similar are the properties in the current comp set. And if the comps that AirDNA has found, say they're all within a very tight range in terms of revenue, you've got 89, 90, 92, that would give you a very high confidence score. On the inverse, or the inverse of that, is say there's a very wide range in the comps that it initially identified, where you have one property doing 30,000 and another property doing 150,000. That's a very wide range, which would bring down your confidence score. Now, luckily, we have the ability to customize our comp set, which I'll show you here in a moment, to try and increase that confidence score and make sure that we're actually pulling in listings that we feel are most similar to ours. So we'll come back to the comps. We'll stick a pin in this just for a moment because we're going to customize these. But before I do that, I just want to show you the financial calculator piece. So this is where you're able to come in and input your details for operating expenses. And the reason this is important is because it lets you understand what your net operating income is going to be. Now, we don't have any input fields here for your mortgage, right? For your principal, interest, tax, and insurance. So we'll be able to take that into account afterwards. But you're able to get the vast majority of the expenses locked in here. So let's actually take a moment here to input what we believe some of these expenses will be. And we'll go back to the comp set because I think that'll take a little bit more time, but let's just quickly go over the different expenses that are here. So we've got the purchase price. So again, this property was listed at $879,000, right? That was the list price here. So we'll take this, we'll punch in 879, and you can see as I type, the figures are updating in real time, right? Figures are updating. So let's say add another zero to this. We've got a negative cap rate. So you can see these figures update in real time. So once we have the purchase price locked in, you can see we have startup costs, we have annual operating costs, right? So this is very similar to what I discussed as we were going through the initial part of this video. So for home furnishings, again, my strong recommendation is that you're spending roughly at least, call it 25 to 30 bucks per square foot. Let's just say for this one that we're going to spend 30 bucks a square foot. We're going to keep maybe some of the furniture that already exists, but we're going to try and really make sure that we nail the backyard and the decks and maybe add in some more amenities. So let's say 30 bucks a square foot. That gets us to roughly $75,000 here. $75,000. Home improvement, say there's actually nothing. Maybe there's some minor issues. We get those taken care of during like our due diligence period or maybe with credits from the seller, they take care of those. So we're not planning to add anything in for home improvement. The next field here would be our closing costs. So as I mentioned before, closing costs, it's reasonable to estimate somewhere between 2 to 3% of your purchase price. So 2% of this one is roughly $18,000. Okay. Now your other costs here, that'll be things like, like your setup, right? Getting all those linens and buying new televisions and buying forks and replacing pots and pans. And let's just say, again, it looks like it's coming furnished with a lot of items. Let's just assume maybe another $2,500 here to replace some odds and ends. Okay. So now we get an idea of what our total startup costs are. And now we can jump over to our operating expenses. Okay. Management fee. So let's assume you're going to self-manage here. So I'm going to set the management fee to 0. Lodging tax. So this is if you're paying lodging taxes because maybe you're taking some direct bookings, or maybe you're getting some bookings from platforms that aren't collecting and paying those taxes on your behalf. But the big OTAs, Airbnb, Vrbo, even Booking.com, they'll pay those taxes. They'll collect them and pay them on your behalf. So you're not necessarily coming out of pocket for those. So let's just, again, here we'll assume that that's going to be zeroed out. Property taxes, 1% seems about reasonable for this property here. Cleaning fees. So your cleaning fees, again, as I mentioned, they're both income and they are expenses. Let's assume that your cleaner is charging you $300 per turn. And, making some assumptions around occupancy and your average stay duration, maybe you end up spending about $2,000 a month on cleaning fees. That gets you to about $24,000 a year on cleaning fee expenses, which isn't unreasonable. You know, for a cabin of this size, you're probably spending close to $300 a month to get it cleaned and turned. Maintenance, and I'll kind of lump maintenance, repairs, CapEx all into kind of one piece here. And let's just assume maybe 10%, give or take, of what revenues might be. And again, we'll back into what we think the revenues are going to be, but just for a solid number here, I'll start off at $10,000. Okay. That will be roughly 10% if this property does about $100,000 a year. Next, you have insurance. Larger property, California, let's just say that insurance is $2,500 a month. Utilities, again, larger property, maybe on average, you're spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 a month. That's your internet, your water, electric, gas, all those things. That comes out to about $6,000 a year. HOA fees, we don't have any. And then other, we've taken care of most of the big things, but things like maybe your consumables, buying more toilet paper, paper towels, we don't have those in there. And, maybe consumables come out to be another, call it $200 a month on average for a property this size. So we'll just round up to maybe $2,500 a year for your other expenses, right? Consumables and some wiggle room there. Now, notice we still have the revenue, and we're going to come back to update this, right? I just want to leave it at what their current estimation is. But once I've been able to go back and add in all my figures, again, you can see as I've gone through, I can see how everything updates. So my operating expenses at almost $54,000. My NOI currently is at 24, almost 25. I've got a cap rate at 2.54%. So it doesn't seem like a super sexy deal yet, but we still got to go back and validate what we think the revenue will be. All right. So you can either reset to default, which I won't do, or you can save your changes. So let's hit save changes. And now I can see these numbers have been updated. Great. So now I've got my expenses plugged into this tool. Now I need to go back and really dial in my revenue figures. That's where going back here to the comps and being able to customize those comps comes into play. So I can see the map right now of the comps that have been selected. And if I go to the list view, I can actually see the list of the comps that are currently selected. And as of right now, there are 46 comps that are currently selected for my comp set. And again, the reason why the confidence score is medium right now, we can see just even on this first page, look at the range of revenue. This one's doing almost 100K, and we've got this one doing 30K. This one doing 55, this one doing 70, this one doing 60. So there's a wide range here of what we're seeing from revenue: 122, 105, 61, 47, 32. We're most likely not going to see that big of a range when we actually launch the property. There'll be a tighter range here. So what I want to do here is click on the customize comps. And this is going to take me to a new page where I can see the comps that are currently selected for this property. And then I can see the comps that are currently available. And if I hit this plus sign, it gets added. If I hit this delete sign, it gets removed. So what we want to do here is we want to go through each of the comps that were originally selected and see, do we actually feel like this comp aligns with my vision, my plan for the property? Now, AirDNA has thought of a lot of these different features. So if you click on this, it'll actually bring up an overview of that listing. And within this page, I can see tons of details about this specific property. I can see the review score, 4.2, not all that great. I can see the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the number of guests that it sleeps. I can see the photos. I can click and actually see the Airbnb listing, which is a great way to quickly gauge how nice or maybe how not nice a specific property is, right? And looking at this one, if we just listed this property as is, if we did nothing else to this one and we listed it with its exact current condition, it would compete or maybe even beat this listing, right? So as you go through and you pick your comps, you want to stress test at different levels. So again, remember, you've got your worst case, your middle case, and your best case scenario. If I was modeling for my worst case, this would be it. I would leave this comp in here. But let's say right now I want to model for my best case scenario. Knowing that, I would actually delete this listing here. Okay, so I'm going to delete this one. And it did $107,000, right? And I feel like this is one of my worst, my floor potentially. So I would go through and I would delete this one. Then I would click the next one, do that same exercise. Now, in addition to cleaning up this list, I also want to choose potentially new comps from this list. Now, here's property that did $320,000. My assumption here is that this property is probably lakefront, maybe super massive, maybe not a great comp. But here's one that did 189,000. Another one did 182,000, 175,000. So I would click through all of these additional listings as well and see, are any of these potentially properties that aren't included that I feel would be a good comp for me, that maybe could be a best case scenario. And this is actually a great example. Well, let's open up the actual Airbnb listing. This one's got 5 stars, 55 reviews. It's got a hot tub on a deck. They've made obviously some improvements from just a finishes standpoint and construction quality, but they've also added a gym, really cool, with a sauna. So this is like, okay, cool. If we really want to invest some capital and improve this one, this is one that we could potentially compete with, right? If we talk about our best case scenario, we got the EV charger. It's not a world of a difference, improvement over ours, but there are some subtle changes, some subtle improvements that maybe we could add to make ours perform better. So knowing that, I would add this specific listing, right? Running Wolves Lodge. I would add this to my comp set. So here's Running Wolves Lodge. I'm going to hit the plus sign. And now I can see it's been added, boom, right there. So I won't make you watch as I go through and select all of these listings. We'll use the magic of editing so you can see what the finished product looks like. Okay, so now I've gone through and I've selected 10 comps that I feel are a really good representation of what I feel my best case scenario is for this property. And you can see now that I've created my own custom comp set, the confidence score is super high. And I can see updated values for my ADR, for my occupancy, for my projected revenue. Now, as you're going through and selecting your comps, you do have the ability to filter down this list. Sometimes it can get big. So if you want to make the list a little bit more manageable, you can select different attributes. Maybe you want different bedroom counts. Maybe you want to limit it to properties that have the same bedroom count as you. This is actually super helpful. You should always pretty much be, if you're doing large properties like this, view all, but they've got the real estate types as well. In some markets, you might see condos or townhomes, and you're buying a single family detached residence. Maybe you only want to also compare yourself to other single family detached residences. So you pick the home, or maybe you do have a condo and you want to go with the apartment option. So you have ways to slice these available comps as well, so it's not too overwhelming. And same thing from the amenity standpoint. If your subject property has a pool, or if you know that you want to have a gym and an EV charger, you can filter it down to find the comps that are specifically matching with those amenities. So there are lots of ways to filter the available comps, so it becomes easier to choose the ones that make the most sense for you. And you can also just kind of choose from the map here. So if I were to expand the map, you can see full map. Now I'm just looking at the map here and I can see all the different listings. Here's my subject property, and I can click and view and open from there if I want to choose from a geographic point of view as well. Once you've selected your comps, there's this update report button. You'll hit that. And now I can see my updated figures flow back into this report. So we've got the projected revenue here of $176, almost $177,000. It's updated here. So my cap rate improves to an almost 11 cap. And now this is starting to look like a pretty decent deal. Now you've got some options here. You can save this report so you can come back to it later. You can download it as a PDF so you can share it with folks. And guys, this is how easy and how straightforward it is to build your comps and analyze deals within the Rentalizer tool. So now we're going to jump over to my calculator, and I'll show you a little bit of the nuance that I add as I'm doing my analysis as well. Okay, so now we're inside of my analysis calculator, and you'll see that a lot of the inputs are pretty similar to what we saw through AirDNA, but I'll just quickly go over how this one's laid out as well. So we have our property info, where we just plug in the details of the property. We have this comments section where I just put some basic notes about the property as I was going through the photos. Again, no views, not lakefront, some of the amenities that I want to add. And next we've got our purchase section. We've got our offer price, which again is set to $879. Let's just assume that maybe we're going to put down 25% on this deal. Okay. Or maybe 20%. So that'll give us a down payment of $175,000. Next, we have our estimated closing costs, which is almost similar to the $18,000 that we use on the AirDNA Rentalizer tool. Renovation costs, I got this set at $30 a square foot pretty much the same number. And then for setup costs, I'll punch in the same $2,500 there as well. So now I can see my total cash investment is $270,000 for this deal. We'll come to the income here in a second, but same as we did with the Rentalizer, I just want to go to the expenses first. And for the expenses, let's assume that on the mortgage side, we get a 30-year mortgage. Interest rate is about 7%. We've got property taxes at $8,000, same as what we had before. Insurance at $2,500. No PMI because we put down 20%. No HOA here. I'm assuming monthly utilities at about $500. Cleaning fee per turn, right? So how much are we getting charged per turn is $300. It'll calculate here the average turns per month once we input data for our occupancy and our average stay duration. So this number will fill in here in a moment. And then we've got cable and internet at $100, consumables at $150, repairs and CapEx at 10%. And this 10% is 10% of revenue. Okay, it's just an easy way to kind of calculate those figures. And what you'll see here is that both for the expenses, we have the worst case, the middle case, and the best case. Okay. Now, if we jump over to our income, right, because this is I think the most important part of getting this right. I think most of us are comfortable pulling all the data for expenses, but it's really nailing down the income. And what I did to come up with my income projections is I took data, I exported some data from AirDNA. So in the same way that we saw all of the comps inside of the AirDNA Rentalizer, I was just able to export them. Now, you've got to have the right subscription level to do this. If you can't export, you'll just have to do it from the tab that has all the card views, and you can do the same thing here. But I clicked through. There are, I think, almost 263 different listings in here. And I just clicked through all of them. And as I was clicking through, I opened the photos. I tried to see that same comparison we were doing before. Is it a worst case, a middle case, or a best case match? And you can see I've got some of these here. Again, a best case match means I'm trying to strive to be in that top 10%. And looking at this property feels like it would be in the top 10% based on amenities, based on what it offers, based on its review scores. Middle would be based on where the property's at today. If I invest maybe a little bit more, I can probably compete with this property. And worst would be if I just took this property as is right now and listed it, I could compete with this property. And then the not applicable just means that for whatever reason, I don't feel like it would be a good comp. Most of my not applicables are lakefront properties or properties that were just significantly larger from a square footage perspective or from like a lot size perspective. But I went through all of these different properties. And once I had this analysis done, I was able to look at just my best case scenarios and say, okay, what's my range there? Look at just my middle case scenarios and say, okay, what's my range there? Look at my worst case scenarios and say, what's my range there? And based on that, I was able to kind of quickly identify some different ranges for revenue. So what we have here is the revenue for all of these properties. Okay. Now, I guess let me add one caveat as well. I did filter out some of the data, right? I only looked at properties that were available. So we have this available nights column here. I only looked at properties that were available at least 2/3 of the year. So about 250 nights or more. I wanted at least 10 reviews on those properties as well. And that just allowed me to choose properties that were a little bit more mature and that I could be more confident in the revenue numbers that are being presented here. Because if a property's only been active 97 nights out of the year, well, I can't really take their revenue number at face value. Or if it only has one review, maybe it's not a super mature listing, it's not getting a lot of bookings. So I want properties that are a little bit more mature. But once I do that, once I filter that data, I went through and categorized each property as a best, middle, or worst, I started to see some trends within the revenue. So we've got a crazy outlier here at $352,000. This is one of my not applicables because it was lakefront. And I noticed that quite a few of the properties in the top 10% were lakefront. Now, there were some that snuck in that weren't, but quite a few of them were, right? And we knew that was a challenge for this listing coming in. But I was able to kind of see some clear delineations on where my property would land when I looked at the revenue. And it became clear to me that 100K is probably the worst case for this property. Based on the properties that are in this range, I knew that most of these were my worst cases, right? Like even probably going up to about $110,000. Those are all properties where if I listed our property as is, it would be competing with these. My best case is probably getting closer to like the very similar to what the AirDNA Rentalizer said, the 180 range, and that middle, somewhere in the 140. So now I've got these three different values where I've got revenue at 100K, I've got revenue at about 140, and my upper limit is about 180,000, okay? Now, let me show you how we would factor those numbers in here. So let's start with my average daily rates. And well, actually, I'll put in my occupancy first. Market-wide, let's just assume the occupancy is around 50%. That's a good gauge for what we saw for a property this size. I need to include my cleaning fee that I'll be charging to the guest as well. Now, remember, AirDNA's figures, what we're seeing here, these include your cleaning fee. I like to just separate it out when I'm doing my calculations, just so I have some visibility on, okay, what am I collecting as cleaning fee income, and then what am I paying out? Just so I can see that differentiation. And then my average stay duration, let's just say on average, my guest is staying 2 nights, okay? So now you can see, as soon as I plugged in this data, now we've got some more data piling into our expenses. We can see some of the income data coming together as well, but we need to finish it off by adding our average daily rate and our occupancy figures. So again, my lower limit is about 100K. And what I'm looking at here is this column here, okay? This column here, this gross income per year. What I'll actually do here is I'll make this in a different color so you guys can see it more visually here. But my worst case, like I said, I'll probably do somewhere around 100 grand. So maybe that's 350, maybe 375. Yeah, so I'm getting pretty close here. So somewhere in this ballpark is where I'll be, right, as my worst case scenario. Now I can see that at doing 100 grand, I'm actually losing 12 grand a year. Not ideal. Okay, not ideal. Now my most likely case, again, doing about 150, somewhere in that ballpark. So maybe this is like 450. Looks like maybe even a little bit higher, 500, a little bit higher, 600, 625. So I'm just kind of playing with this somewhere in this ballpark, right? So as I get to that middle case scenario, I'm at a 9% return. Not terrible, 24,000 bucks in cash flow on an annual basis, 2 grand a month. Hard to do that with the long-term rental, right? And then my best case scenario, as I mentioned before, would be us doing, somewhere close to 180. So let's kind of play with these numbers a little bit. Maybe it's 800 on the nose. Yeah, 825, somewhere in that ballpark of doing about 180 grand. Now we're cranking, right? A 20% cash on cash return at a 7% interest rate. That's a crazy good deal. Now, would I buy this? Maybe. I think it depends on how confident I am that I could spend, $75,000 in design and amenities to really achieve this. Or am I spending $75,000 to get here, right? And, maybe if I land somewhere in between, it's still a good deal. But this is my process. So first, I go through all of the listings, and it's a painful process to click through all these different listings, but it's very, very useful to build your worst, your middle, and your best case scenario. And from there, I'm able to get a very clear picture on what my different levels are for income. So guys, I hope seeing both my calculator and the AirDNA Rentalizer gives you some confidence on what it takes to actually go from A to Z on analyzing deals. So there you have it. That's how we analyze all of our Airbnb purchases. Now, hopefully this breakdown was helpful for you. If you have any questions, drop a comment below and we'll do our best to answer it. That's it for today, guys. I'm Tony, she's Sarah, and we are the Real Estate Robinsons.